This is my 1998 Range Rover 2.5 DSE that sadly was left abandoned here in Ireland for over 5 years. But now I'm bringing it back to its former glory, one video at a time. In this episode we're tackling the Achilles heel of the Range Rover, the air suspension. We're going to start by rebuilding the worn out compressor and the leaky valve block. Now hopefully you guys are going to find this video interesting, as well as perhaps useful for those P38 owners out there. Picking up new skills has always been a lifelong ambition of mine, so that's why I'm really happy to announce that this video is sponsored by Skillshare. If you have a specific skill you're trying to learn, Skillshare is the perfect place to start. From photography and illustration to specific software skills like SolidWorks or Premiere Pro, starting a side hustle to earn a bit of extra cash, or anything else you can imagine, you can find classes that will match your goals and interests. As a home renter, one of my main goals for the next year or two is to finally become a home owner. Aside from the financial benefits of that, being a homeowner will allow me to build my dream workshop to work on my project vehicles. So in preparation, I've dived into this Autodesk Revit Architecture Masterclass course by Oscar Gorgon to enable me to design and build my very own workshop. Aside from the satisfaction of doing this myself, it'll also likely save me a huge amount of money in the future when it comes to start building. So if you'd be interested in picking up a brand new skill, the first 1,000 people to use the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. I just want to say another big thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel, as it's really going to help out a lot with the restoration and renovation of the P38 Range Rover. Speaking of which, let's get back to the task at hand. Okay, so 8mm. The first job is of course to remove the compressor and the valve block from the vehicle. There we go. There we go, so we'll take this inside, put that on the bench. And by bench I mean dining room table. And we'll get ready to rebuild that, but first we're going to try and get this out. Okay, then you'll see on the side here we've got all of the air lines obviously that go into the valve block, so I'm going to take a picture quickly showing you where all of those go, and then we'll start disconnecting them. Yeah, then next we'll start pulling these air lines out. So we're going to use these needle nose pliers just to push the collets in. I'm actually gripping the pipe with this, and then wiggle the pipes out like that. You should of course be pretty careful when you're dealing with high pressure pneumatics like this, but there's not much pressure left in mine because the suspension has been let down. Actually line up pretty nicely with the holes which they go in, so it should be pretty hard to get this the wrong way around. And we've got one last line down here. Okay, nice and easy. There we go, easy as that. So there's our valve block, guys. We'll take that inside and we'll start the strip down process. So I think we're going to start with the air compressor just to get ourselves warmed up, as this is obviously a lot more simple compared to the main valve block over there. This basically is just an electric motor with a crankshaft and a piston in here, and there's a piston a bore in here like a cylinder, which we're going to replace, and the piston seal itself, as well as a few other bits. So yeah, let's get started. Now the kits I'm using have been kindly provided to me by this company X8R. Now these guys make lots of kind of improved parts and kits for various different vehicles, but this kit is obviously a P38 compressor rebuild kit. So it looks like we've got lots of exciting bits in there, including some instructions, which is always good to see. Which I'm probably going to need, so I've never done this before. There's our little instruction manual, very nice. And then all of our parts and pieces here, we're going to leave them in the bag for now to keep them all together. They've also got these PDF instructions on the website, so we're going to head into there and follow through on this guide. So it's saying the first step actually is to replace the filters, and to do that, it's just in here, this guy on the end. I like how they make you do this first, just because they know you'll probably forget to do it if you go ahead and just dive straight into the compressor. Okay, that's the lid off, and then inside we've got this black piece of foam, and there's another piece underneath it, which looks like a piece of felt. Pretty sure that's supposed to start off white, so you can see how mucky that is. And just from touching it, my fingers got pretty dirty. So yeah, you can see that's the original colour of the filter, and that's it now, so definitely worth replacing. So, new piece of felt going in, new piece of foam on top of that, and the lid back on. So the next step is going to be to take the head of the compressor off. So it's going to be these 4 Torx headed screws, which actually do have a hex on the outside as well if you don't have the correct Torx. And then we'll be able to get into the actual compressor, the guts of the compressor itself. These are quite loose luckily, well not loose, but they're not too seized like most other stuff on Range Rover. Okay, so cylinder head cover is this bit. And in there you can see our little intake valve and this O-ring which we're going to be replacing, and then this itself is the actual head. So there you can see the cylinder liner. Okay, so we've got quite a few parts now. And then we've got our actual piston, and this is the piston ring which we're going to be replacing as well, which to be honest doesn't look too bad. I've probably seen a lot worse, but it's obviously seen a fair bit of wear, so we'll get it replaced. And then we can actually take the piston liner off as well. You can see by looking at the inside of this guy, hopefully you guys can see in there's a fair bit of scoring going on, and it's kind of polished pretty well where that piston's been going up and down, so again, not terrible. So the next thing the guy wants us to do is take off this face plate, which is another 3 of the same Torx screws, and this is going to open up into the actual guts of the crankshaft where the conrod comes down. So okay, so we've got another gasket on the inside of that, and then in here you guys can see where that would work. Got a counterweight here and the conrod, and then I guess this will be our crankshaft in here. So next, in order to actually get the piston out, we're going to have to take out this grub screw here. This is just blocking a hole, an access hole basically, so we can get out the bolt that's holding the compressor onto the shaft. So find an Allen key that'll fit that and get it out. So it's going to be a 4mm Allen key. I ended up using a T-bar on it because it was extremely stiff. You'd never get it with a normal 3mm Allen key, so yeah, T-bar it is. So you don't need to take this all the way out, just loosen it enough so that the piston can come off of the shaft. Once that's taken off, we should be able to manoeuvre the piston out. Like that. So now that it's out, we can have a good look at the piston seal and see that it's pretty well worn. Again, pretty well polished, and pretty hard as well. I wouldn't say it's completely worn out, but definitely past its best. And but luckily the bearing in the bottom end of the piston here is really good. So the next step is going to be to basically cut as much of this seal off with a Stanley knife as we can, in order to basically be able to get down underneath this part here, which is called the clamp ring. And then we need to lever that off to get the rest of the seal off. So we'll start by cutting into it, which cuts in pretty nicely with a Stanley. We'll start cutting away. So I'm just going to use a small screwdriver now. Once I've cut most of that seal away, just start prising up the locking ring, which seems to be coming up now. There we go. So that's our locking ring. You guys can see there. And then we should be able to get rid of the rest of this seal now. And clean up the face of this. Okay, so now to make this easier, I'm actually going to drop the new sleeve over the piston. And then we're going to fit the new seal, and you'll see why in a minute. It kind of basically makes it easier to get the seal through the liner. So now that's on there, we're going to chuck a little bit of Loctite just on the inside of the locking ring here, just to help it stay on. Not much at all, just a little bit. And then make sure we get it the right way up. Pop that over the top. Ideally you'd have a vise for this, but not until I have a workshop. I'm not going to bolting a vise down to the table. So use the socket to make sure it goes on square. And that's looking pretty good. So there we go. Now the reason I put this on first is because if you look at the shape of the seal, it's actually tapered up slightly. So to push it on this way and squeeze it into the liner is much easier than trying to get it on the other way around. So there we go. Now that that's on there, we can take it off, and you guys will see it's actually reshaped the seal slightly. It's squeezed it in and made it fit to the internal diameter of this. So now when we put this in, it'll be a lot easier to squeeze this over the end without causing any damage. Which is what we're going to do next. Okay, so now this part's done, we're going to go back to the cylinder head. And here you guys will see there's a reed valve in here which basically controls the air in and out of the compressor. So we're going to take that little screw out in there that's holding the reed valve in. Okay, there's actually two in there. There's this top plate which is thick, so we're going to keep that there, remembering which way round it went. And then this reed here is the part that actually seals against the O-ring. So we'll give them a clean up before they go in, but just remembering which way around they go in. So that way down, that one on the bottom, that one on top. And then you'll see in there, it looks extremely flat at the moment. I'll zoom you guys in so you can have a look. So hopefully you can see in there, that shiny flat black ring there is actually an O-ring. So you can see how flattened and worn that is. So this could well have been the issue with the compressor. If this O-ring wasn't leaking, the compressor would basically be pushing air backwards and forwards through this hole. So we need to lever that out, clean it out, and then pop our new sealing. Looks like it was put in there with some sealant at some point. So with all of that out there, we can pop our new O-ring in. Like that. So that should allow air into the compressor when the reed valve gets sucked open, but it will close down under pressure once the piston starts coming back up again. So there we go. Okay, with that part done, we now flip the head over and just giving this a bit of a clean up. We're going to put our new O-ring on this side. Goes in there like that. Again, just going to give this face a quick clean up. It's really pretty clean anyway. Actually, there's not any residue or anything in the O-ring groove. Pop our new sealant ring in. Just using the flat side of my screwdriver to just push this into place. And then we can pop our cylinder head back on again. Make sure we get the outlet facing towards the back of the compressor. Take our head plate, give that a bit of a wipe off. Chuck our new O-ring in. Pop the head plate back on again. We should be good to throw our bolts back in again and start tightening them up. Now I'm not going to go crazy. I know I've got a really big long ratchet here. It doesn't need that much torque. You guys saw that they were fairly loose when they came off, so I'm going to go around diagonally tightening up. And all we've got to do is put our cover plate back on again. that. And take our filter, which we put our fresh filters in right at the start. Screw them back in. And there we go. It's one rebuilt compressor. So next up, we're going to look at the valve block, which is a lot more of a simple device than it really looks at first glance. So we'll go through and have a look at everything on here. This is obviously the ports that go into the valve block itself, where we disconnected all of the pipes from earlier. And behind each of these collets there's a little O-ring in there, so we're going to have to take these out and replace those O-rings. We'll probably do that first actually. So apart from that, most obvious thing we've got is these 5 solenoids on top and 2 on the bottom. And these are the actual sort of coils that control the valves within the valve block itself. So when the ECU sends a signal, it comes through to this board in here, which converts that low level, low current signal to a higher current power to activate these solenoids, and that's actually what opens the valves and controls the movement of the suspension of the Range Rover. So on the bottom we've got 2 more solenoids which control 2 more valves, pressure relief, and also a pressure sensor in there as well, so not too much to it really. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually number all of these. Almost said name then. Yeah, James, John, Paul, Toby. Now I'm actually going to number all of these solenoids with my paint pen, just so we get them all back in the original place. So just put a tiny little 1, a little 2, a little 3, 4, 5. So next we're going to take off the driver unit with these 4 Allen-headed bolts. Remove that. To make it easier, I'm actually going to take out this pressure switch as well. So next job is to take off all the solenoids. Noting which way around they go, so I've obviously got a video to help me in getting stuff back where it should be, but you guys take pictures, do whatever you need. To be fair, there's enough pictures on the internet showing you where stuff should go, so you should be alright. So we'll number these guys as well. We've got to 5 on the bottom, so we'll go 6 there and 7 nearest to the relief valve, just so we know where everything goes. Okay, we can put all these solenoids off. If I'm going to show you all the screws properly. And they can all go out of the way. Next up, these solenoid bases are all going to come off as well, so we're going to number each one of these like we did with the tops. So starting at the left again. So next, to remove these solenoid covers, we're going to take out the flat-headed screws. There's 2 on each. There are 2 other screws here, but they're actually for holding the bases together, so we want to just remove them entirely rather than take them to bits. So. Okay, now so as we take each of these off, you'll notice there are 2 O-rings under each one. One large one on the outside and then one tiny one on the inside, so we're going to keep them all together. These are all obviously going to be replaced, but just good to note that they're all there. So. So So the next thing we're going to remove is this, which is the diaphragm block. Just 4 Allen-headed bolts for this. And you've got to be careful when you take this off because there's a spring which lives underneath this. So when you remove it, you've got to be very careful that doesn't jump out and get lost, because it would be a very bad day if you happen to lose that spring. So we'll very carefully lift this off. There we go, there's our spring underneath. And on the bottom of this, we should see our diaphragm. There we go. So on the diaphragm block, we're just going to prise out this old O-ring. Should be pretty well stuck in there. And you guys can see hopefully how flat that is. Definitely time for replacement. And then this guy should prise out just like that. Okay, I'm going to take our diaphragm spring out, pop that safely on our magnetic parts tray. Okay, so next we're going to take off our non-return valve block. Again, 4 more Allen-headed bolts to take out. And then under here we should see our non-return valves, so just got to carefully lift this off. Like so. There's nothing stuck in there. There's not, so we're good. Put that to one side. In the end here we've got some very delicate looking non-return valves. So if you guys can see that, basically just a spring-loaded valve seat, which sits nicely in the little machined seat we've got in the block there. So yeah, pretty cool little bit of machining. So now we're left with O-rings around where all those NRVs were, so we can pull all of those out. Again, these O-rings looking extremely flat and well worn, so yeah, again, good to get rid of them. So next up we're going to start removing all of these collets that are left in the block, and behind each one we're going to find 2 O-rings, which are sealing. And for this job, a very small crochet hook is ideal, so if you've got a missus that's very crafty like mine, see if you can nick one of her crochet hooks, because this makes pulling out the O-rings doddle. Yeah, the crochet hook's a perfect kind of shape for just getting inside and hooking around those O-rings and fishing them out. So yeah, that's all of those out. Okay, now those ports are nice and clean, we're ready to throw our new O-rings in before putting the collets back in. We're actually probably going to give these a bit of a clean up as well before they go in. I'll probably throw them in a bit of soapy water and give them a bit of a brush up. Now this is where the X8R kits are really cool, because they're all individually bagged and labelled, so you know exactly which bits go where. So airline seals, that's the bag we're going to be using first. So we're putting these new O-rings in. I'm just going to use a bit of Vaseline to lubricate the O-rings, just a tiny amount, which will just help them seal and go in properly. So ideally you'd use dielectric grease or something along those lines, but for our purposes, a bit of Vaseline will do the job nicely. And you just got to carefully use a screwdriver or a flat-ended device ideally. Just push it down into position. So there we go, that's all those O-rings seated in there nicely. You just want to give them a little bit of a press as they're going in, just to make sure they're fully all the way down, and then that should be good to go. So next up we're going to replace the NRV O-rings. Give this a quick wipe down. Again, it's pretty clean. And we're going to use this bag labelled port seals to do that. So, okay. Feels really good to be putting fresh O-rings back everywhere now. There we go. So next up, on the NRVs themselves, hopefully you guys can see there are tiny O-rings just actually on the valve seat. So we need to take those off very carefully and pop the new ones on. So yeah, very gently with these because they're very delicate bits of kit. So for these NRV O-rings on the very tips, you'll want to raid your missus's sewing equipment again, get a needle, and then you can thread it underneath the O-ring like this. And then use that to help prise it over the end of the NRV like that. So yeah, very, very tiny little O-rings. A tiny new O-ring, squeeze it very gently over the end of the NRV, like that. So we popped our NRVs back into the top of the valve in the same orientation that they came out, and we're actually ready now to put the NRV valve block back on again. Again, don't have to go crazy with these. Just enough to compress those O-rings and make it nice and airtight. So now with the old diaphragm seal that I took out of this diaphragm block, we need to remove the actual metal part of the diaphragm from the middle. Oh, you can actually see this one's broken. That's interesting. So that crack could definitely have been causing some issues with our valve block. So replacing that part, and we're keeping this part here. I'm going to whack our new seal around our existing seat, like that. And that's ready to go back into the valve block. And then that'll sit in there like that. And then this is our new O-ring to go in, and again we're just going to give it a very light smear of Vaseline to help it seal. Okay, now this is ready to go back on again. The only thing we've got to remember to do is put our spring back in. So again, give this a bit of a clean. Spring back in the hole. And then our valve block. So I'll pop the collets back in again. Next, we're going to disassemble each of these valve stems, and there's an O-ring to replace inside here. So we're going to do these one at a time, just so we don't get the parts mixed up. So once that's off, we'll pull out the valve stem. Put that to one side, and you should be able to see this little, very thin O-ring on the valve stem itself. So pull that off. Just I'm using our bag labelled solenoid plunger seals. Sorry. And I'll pop our new O-ring over the top like that, and then hit our screws back in. So with the internal O-ring replaced, we can do the two on the bottom. So peel these guys out. There's a very tiny one there which we're going to use our pin to pull out. Grab our new ones again, nice labelled bag. Okay, so that's that guy done. Put him to one side. Just got to repeat this another 6 times. With the 6 larger ones, they also have a O-ring on top as well, so we'll chuck him out. So we have our 7 solenoid bases already rebuilt with new O-rings. So next stage is going to be sticking these back on the valve block, and then we'll start replacing the O-rings in the solenoid tops, and then pretty much there at that point. So we're going to start with number 1 at this end, which is the only one that has this square O-ring in, so I'll just put a fresh one of those in. While I'm missing screws back in. So there we go, that's all the solenoids back together again. What we've got to do now is throw the driver board back into place again and get this bracket in the right place, so I'll have to sort of figure out where that went. There we go. So there we go. That is one fully rebuilt, resealed valve block. All back together. I'm just got to chuck this guy in, I just realised. But yeah, essentially, that's completely rebuilt now. This is all the O-rings we pulled out of it and replaced. A lot of O-rings, as you guys can see. And I mean, most of these, to be fair, probably were okay. A lot of these bigger ones, which are to do with the solenoids, probably there weren't really any issues with those. However, a couple of bits, including this diaphragm seal, definitely have seen better days. As you guys can see, that one's completely torn. So yeah, I mean, definitely worth doing. The valve block should be good for a long time now. That is, if I've done everything right in there and not missed any seals out. But yeah, there we go. Happy with that. So now all that's left to do is throw in our lovely rebuilt valve block and compressor, plumb it all back in again, and then give it a test. Let's get started. Okay, that's the compressor outlet hooked up. Drop it into place onto its studs. God, it's hot today. And that, unfortunately, is where we're going to have to leave it for today on the Range Rover. There's another saga going on at the same time with the cooling system, which is a whole other story. But basically, I'm waiting for some parts to arrive in the form of some coolant pipes before I can completely close up that coolant system. And without that, I can't start the engine because it was just going to squirt coolant all over the place. So we're going to have to leave it there until next time. But make sure you come back for the episode where we're going to be testing that air suspension system and making sure that valve block and the compressor do all the things they're supposed to. I'd like to say another big thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring the video. It makes a massive difference to my ability to be able to repair and look after these project vehicles, so thanks again to them. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, hit that like button, and I'll see you guys in the next video.